4. Humanistic Confession. A book published in 1989 has a thoroughly modern title, Confessions of an SOB. The author, Alan H. Newhouse, allows his former wives and his 2 children to have their say for and against him. He favours Machiavellianism and holds with respect to advancement, power, use it or lose it. Newhouse may or may not be all that he says he is. Many autobiographies exhibit strange qualities. Ancient hagiographies, or biographies of saints, credited the saints with more virtue than was realistic, and certainly more miraculous powers. Contemporary autobiographers sometimes appear to claim more sins than seem possible. Certainly, autobiographies like that of Frank Harris are boastful of more sins than he committed. Nevertheless, if we take such works at face value, some interesting patterns appear. Among these are instances of pleading guilty to a lesser offence. Thus, the appealing Juliet Huxley, in her autobiography, Leaves of the Tulip Tree, 1986, describes sympathetically and uncritically the deep-rooted sense of guilt carried by her husband, the scientist Julian Huxley. She wrote, "Julian carried a demon within." When he was 4, his younger brother Trevenin was born. Until then, he was the sole claimant to his mother's love, was spoiled and cherished, and had a position of centrality. He was the grandson of Thomas H. Huxley and of Matthew Arnold. Although the boys were soon the best of friends, Julian saw Trevenin's birth as the beginning of a burden. This demon tormented Julian all his life with a sense of guilt. A few months before he died, his wife Juliet said to him that this demon within was destroying both of them. He answered, quite casually, "Of course I have a demon. Had it since I was 4. This idea fits nicely with the modern myth of an inescapable sibling rivalry. When occasionally such rivalry or jealousy may occur, it is neither normal nor common. Even when it does occur, it is absurd to see it as the cause of guilt. Such reasoning is pleading guilty to the lesser offence. In Julian Huxley's case, he was a cold and impersonal man. He was anti-Christian and was contemptuous of the faith. He was also an adulterer who told his wife to find her own solace sexually with other men. He saw this not as a question of morality, but of philosophy. Of his wife and of his work, he wrote to a young woman, "In reality, I am a pluralist in my philosophy, having given up the quest for unity." As a humanist, Huxley saw morality as a human product. Julian Huxley suffered all his life from a sense of guilt, which he apparently saw in biological terms after Freud and also in terms of heredity. His grandfather, T.H. Huxley, was a prey to, quote, "a deep-rooted melancholy," end quote, and was consequently often seriously ill. Julian Huxley read his problem in terms of this, but T.H. Huxley had much in his life and work to give him a deep sense of guilt also. Julian Huxley at one point was given electro-shock therapy. Believing guilt to be biological, he sought ostensibly scientific treatment thereof. He would have regarded the Christian confessional as a magical answer. The shock therapy gave him some recovery for a time, but his basic problem remained. Juliet Huxley, clearly a kindly and loving person, had her own deep sense of sin, which she blamed on her Calvinistic mother. Her mother, however, comes through the autobiography as the one superior person. Juliet's lack of faith and her reluctant compliance with Julian's demand that she exercise her sexual quote-unquote freedom are not related to this sense of guilt. Juliet at one point perceptively described Julian as not a physical, but a moral invalid, and as one who knows or thinks he knows himself accursed and finds his thoughts set upon self-destruction as the only way of removing the curse for himself and the accursed life from being a burden to others. It was the work of Freud to separate the sense of sin from the sense of guilt. He recognized that as long as men see themselves as sinners, they will turn to God for grace. But if they see guilt as a problem of the unconscious, they will seek scientific therapy for help. For Julian Huxley to see sibling rivalry as his lifelong problem and for Juliet to blame her mother for her sense of guilt was, in both cases, pleading, to use Edwin Burglar's term, to the lesser offence while concealing the real problem. In other instances, confessions of the autobiographical variety seek other justification, that is, sinning as a means to grace, to use biblical language, or, in modern terms, therapeutic and experimental living. An example of this is Rosemary Daniels, sleeping with soldiers in search of the macho man. She's a writer who has received 2 National Endowment for the Arts grants in literature and has worked as a journalist, an advertising copywriter, and a teacher. She has been also a college poet-in-residence. By her own account, Rosemary Daniel has been 3 times married and divorced. She had gay men friends. She passed discarded lovers on to her daughter. She experimented with lesbianism. She had abortions. She was promiscuous with all kinds of men, especially lower class, was beaten and fought physically with her men, and a psychologist whom she was interviewing pointedly said to her, "I hope you're not attracted to drunken, abusive men," which she was. A strong feminist, Ms. Danielle sought out coarse, crude men who saw women only as sexual toys. While sexually aroused by such men, she confessed also to self-disgust. She says of such men, "My masochism was more readily satisfied by his craziness." She wanted to be possessed by a strong man. One man, given to sadomasochism in his sexual life, said, "I'm just an animal, I guess." And this was his favourite boast. This held an appeal for her, although by her own statement she knew that the relationship was sick. All this was her own form of saturation therapy. One wonders, therapy to what end? She had written in one of her poems, "Only the sensual are innocent." Innocent of what? Why all this sexual experimentation, which to many would appear to be the most distasteful kind of gutter crawling? Juliet Huxley cited a sentence from Paul Tillich as basic to Julian Huxley's views, and the words certainly applied as well to Rosemary Daniel. Tillich wrote, quote, "The immemorial experience of mankind that new knowledge can only be won through breaking a taboo, that all autonomous thinking is accompanied by a consciousness of guilt, has been the fundamental experience of my life." End quote. Such thinking has been basic to modern science and to humanism. Emile Durkheim, in his Rules of Sociological Method, wrote of the criminal as an evolutionary pioneer, testing with his lawlessness all the old moral laws in order to pave the possible way to a new freedom. This belief is not new. It was prevalent in Greco-Roman thought, and then and now it is a belief in experience as the key to knowledge. Paul, confronted by such a faith, declares, "What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein?" Romans 6, 1 and 2. A wealthy modern patroness of the arts had her son taken to a house of prostitution as a first step towards knowledge, and many similar initiations have taken place. The modern humanistic confession is often related to this. The confessor says in effect, "I gained freedom and knowledge by my experience. Go thou and do likewise." The real result, however, is guilt and self-disgust.